Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we're going to continue our reading of Starry, Yule, Charliehorse. Danny Bryce had been dropped off a couple of hours ago at his family farm. It had been a merry meeting, full of light and sound. There in the big floodlit farmyard had been Danny's parents and other relatives, at least two on four legs. Danny had 5 siblings, 2 sisters and 3 brothers. One brother, Ed, was well known to Charliehorse by report. Danny idolized big brother Ed thoroughly enough to follow him into the dedicated cavalry and, like him, like Charliehorse, be permanently transformed. A cheer went up when Danny emerged from the trailer, and Ed had charged him, grinning, arms outspread. Danny had seemed to know what to expect. He had charged back. The brothers reared as they met and performed a kind of double hug, chest to chest and chest to chest, embracing with arms and, as well as they could, with forelegs. They pounded backs and laughed. When they disengaged and landed, Ed had given Danny's sweeping new beard a tug and boomed, "Look at you! Look at you!" Charliehorse looked. Danny had been the shortest member of the class right after transformation, but now, after a growth spurt that had itself seemed almost magical, he was an inch or so taller than Ed, and, like his brother, a ruddy chestnut, but more rangy. While Mrs. Bryce shoved one half-ton son aside to kiss the other, Mr. Bryce came over to shake hands with Charliehorse. "You've been a fine friend to Danny," he said. Danny called home often. "He pined here a bit with no big brothers around, but I think he's got 5 good ones now, from what he tells us." "That's very kind of him to say so, sir." Danny was only 16, the minimum age for recruits to the dedicated cavalry, and the youngest of the class by several years. Mr. Bryce and his sons shared a strong resemblance, from the waist up at least, and Charliehorse briefly entertained an image of all 3 up on hooves. The father was cavalry too, like his wife and daughter, though he and the wife were long mustered out, and of course it had been the standard cavalry, not the dedicated. Danny's family had been supplying horses and soldiers to both cavalries for generations. To linger in the bright, happy throng, Charliehorse had helped carry Danny's luggage to what his mother called the garçonnière, the boys' quarters. It was a wing of the stables. A cousin, a young uncle, and Ed already had rooms there, and now Danny did too. "Used to be a tack room," Mrs. Bryce explained to Charliehorse, "but we moved that all into a spare stall. Well, Danny, what do you think?" Charliehorse suspected that from the wainscoting up, it was a near copy of Danny's old room, as near as it was practical. The walls were covered with posters for bands, horse shows, and soccer and polo teams. There were shelves of plastic model horses, strings of show ribbons. Charliehorse recalled Danny had his own horse, Farthing, and a shelf for a laptop equipped for gaming. The floor was bare except for a clothes chest and a sleeping mat, double thick by cavalry spec. "What do you think?" Mrs. Bryce asked again over the rising noise of invading family. Rather than shout, Danny leaned over and kissed his mother on the cheek. She hugged him around his waist, that being at a convenient height. A few minutes after the recruits' transformations, Captain Fletcher had let their families onto the field to see the result and say their goodbyes until the Christmas leave that was now in progress. Danny's mother had smiled then and wept to see her youngest all grown up. Charliehorse remembered his aunt and uncle standing solemnly before him, trying not to look him up and down. Why not? This change was spectacular. Each taking a hand and gravely hoping he would be happy in the new career, the new form. The note of farewell could hardly have been louder or more final. Charliehorse had started making his way back toward the horse trailer, issuing happy Christmas wishes. It would be sweet to stay longer, but the driver would be on the road long enough, and there were people waiting for him at the end of the journey. Or so he had thought. Could they really have left for a Christmas holiday without him knowing? He pulled out his phone and checked email again. Nothing. There never had been. Not from home. Was it as bad as it could be? Had they read that he was coming and fled? He fanned his phone's light up to the roof of one house to check for smoke at the chimney, but the little beam did not reach. Leaving his luggage in the road, he paced slowly into the yard. Without the light, there was only the faintest glow, scattering from snow to snow to snow from the village down the road. You could barely tell the houses were there. With the phone light on the snow, slight though it was, he could see and recognize the front yard of his home. He could recognize it, but it was dreamingly strange. He had last seen it in June, by daylight, as he had left to be changed. Now it was dark and snowy, but also further down. He had never seen it from this angle. He had left a bit under 6 feet tall. Now he was 7 feet 4 inches. 7 feet and a hand, he liked to say when people asked him his height, as they sometimes did, since he was tall even for what he was now. He walked slowly round the house, peering through the windows for a hint of light. He considered how monstrous that could look from inside, a huge thing prowling in the dark, dark itself and strangely formed, looking for a way in, all too familiar with the grounds. "Serve 'em right," he growled. He nursed the ill temper because he could feel the upset building inside himself, and grumpiness seemed a better channel for it than bereft sorrow. He would readily trade it for laughter at the silly mistake that he hoped was there. Here was the well for the basement window. He leaned over, then knelt, then lay, horse belly down in the snow, and peered in. A little red light. The phone beam showed it was an indicator on the furnace. Running furnace. People home. Right. He rose and trotted back to the driveway. His large family occupied both houses on the lot. The Darnley house and the Arlingway house sometimes, but more usually this house and that house. He had been examining the Darnley house. Both houses had front doors facing the road, but these were formal, seldom used. Most people used the side doors facing the common drive and the garage. Charliehorse went to the side door and leaned on the doorbell, then trotted past the garage to ring to the other house and lean on the other doorbell, then back again, trot, ring, trot, ring, trot, ring. By the fourth round, lights were coming on in both houses, so it was not as bad as possible. They had not run away from him. The door of the Darnley house, his parents' house, opened. There was Uncle Nathan with Aunt Constance and others behind him. The door light came on. They stared. "Charles?" Nathan asked. He sounded sincerely unsure. "Yes," Charliehorse exclaimed. "You have seen me before. I mean, like this." Just the once. And the beard and the duty jacket were new, but still, and he had sent a few pictures. "Didn't you get my email?" "What the fuddled hell?" came Uncle Mark's voice from the other house. Charliehorse felt an old cringe start up in his human belly, echoed in the new horse belly. His tail started to tuck. No. He wheeled. There was Uncle Mark slogging out into the snowy driveway in boots, tying his bathrobe. More people appeared in the door. "Happy Christmas," Charliehorse called, then gave a determined smile and waited. Behind Mark came Aunt Eleanor, looking amazed, then Lily. Someone turned on the garage light and people began to pour out of the houses. Soon they were gathered around him, staring. It would have made an interesting tableau had anyone driven by to see it, but the sundering would make quite sure that no one did. "What the hell are you doing here?" Mark demanded. "I'm home for Christmas, as I said in my letter." Charliehorse scanned the faces. Except for wrathful Mark, everyone stared at him with astonishment. Horror? Dismay? Wonder was too much to hope for. Let's go with astonishment. "Did anyone read the letter?" "What letter?" asked Aunt Constance. "One yesterday, one a week ago." He scanned the crowd. It looked like everyone was there. Nearly. Not his parents. He looked up to the top floor of the Darnley house. His father was outlined against a lit window looking down. Uncle Mark was getting red in the face. "Didn't you notice," he demanded, "that you got no replies?" Oh, yes, he'd noticed. "Yes," Charliehorse answered, "but both of mine were headed coming home for Christmas. I did give you a chance, if you wanted to tell me to stay away." Mark turned redder. "I blocked them." "What?" exclaimed his wife, Aunt Eleanor. "How? When?" "Put his address in the spam filters after his first letter." The family had a joint email in addition to their individual accounts. After the silence answering his first message to the family account, Charliehorse had not tried reaching any of them individually. He had barely wanted to send at all. But he had made excuses for them. They were at a loss for what to say. They were, many of them, bad at answering letters, and of course some wanted nothing to do with him. And he had still sent a few more messages to the family account. "What letter?" said Lily. "Filters," said Eleanor, buzzing the plural ominously. "All our filters?" Her husband glared at her, and she returned fire. "You meddling old domestic tyrant!" And they were at it again. Mark retreated toward the door. Eleanor pursued. The rest of the family flowed away from them and around Charliehorse, but not too close. He took in their stunned gazes. "So you never saw any of the pictures?" Shaken heads, a few no's. "So this is the first time you've seen me like this?" Some nods. Since they were giving him plenty of room, he turned in place, his arms out. "Well, this is it. This is me from now on, unless something equally drastic happens off in the out zones." He saw cousins Julia and Yvette, daughters of Mark and Eleanor, slip away toward the Arlingway house. Talk of the transformation had repelled them in the months before he left, and he probably repelled them now. That left quite a crowd. Even minus the two girls, their arguing parents, and his own parents up in their suite, there was still Uncle Nathan, Aunt Constance, and a dozen assorted siblings and cousins gathered around him. 20 people, grand total, down from 22. "And there's no place ready for me to stay." Uncle Nathan glanced up at the Arlingway house. Charliehorse's old room was up 2 flights of stairs and would now fit him more like a wood and plaster garment than a chamber. "That's okay." He went back to the road and in 2 trips fetched his luggage to one of the garage doors. Then he lifted the door. "May I have a key?" he asked the onlookers. Aunt Constance made a move toward the Darnley house but paused, puzzled. "Why?" she began. "I can move the car out and set up in the garage." "How can you drive it?" asked Cousin Alex. "I'll just put it in neutral and push it out." "Here!" yelled Mark, returning with Eleanor. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to move the car out so I can set up in the garage, for tonight at least." "You can't do that. You'll be seen." "I'll close the door," Charliehorse replied in the explaining to morons voice. Behind him, Constance gave a small "huh." All the senior family members and several of the junior ones used this tone with Mark sometimes, but this was the first time for Charles. "It's not that," snapped Eleanor, who was apparently siding with Mark in this. "You'll be seen if you stay here at all." "And we're not having it," Mark declared. "We're having guests over the holidays, and we're not having you on display." "I live here," Charliehorse insisted, and realized he had stamped when the onlookers jumped slightly. "You live in a stable, a barnyard. I had no idea you'd take it into your head to come back here. You don't even fit through the doors." "You're an idiot," Mark's wife told him. "If you hadn't blocked his mail, we'd have known he intended to come and could have told him to stay away." But then she rounded on Charliehorse. "You're not staying in the garage. What are you doing here? How'd you even get here?" Charliehorse folded his arms across his chest, then spread and locked his legs. "I came here in a horse carrier. Very nice. Heated, mats, TV, the works. With 3 of my mates, all of us going home for Christmas. No one else seemed to have an issue with accommodation." "Well, we're not accommodating you. We don't want you here at all." Charliehorse sat his hindquarters down in the snow and looked immovable, while still staring down at Eleanor from 7 feet up. "I'm not leaving. I live here," he repeated. "What do you propose to do about me? Call the dog catcher?" "We'll call the cavalry," Mark declared. They really were such a perfect match, Charliehorse reflected. Aunt Lou had often said so during or after one of their squabbles. "We'll have them send that horse trailer back and haul you away." Charliehorse had been in the military only half a year, but he had a pretty good idea how such a move would go down. If Mark managed to get through at all, the cavalry, probably in the person of poor Lieutenant Sanders, would inquire what the emergency was. On learning that the emergency was Mark's distaste for Charliehorse, he would make a few sharp or soothing noises according to mood and hang up. "Go ahead," Charliehorse told Mark. "I'll wait here." Mark and Eleanor fumed their way back into the Arlingway house. "You don't seem worried," Aunt Constance remarked. "I'm not. May I have that car key, or does he win for having the biggest tantrum?" She looked at the open garage. "If you really want," she said, "where else can you put me?" But then Charliehorse looked in the garage, too, at the stained concrete floor, at the ultra-wintry fluorescent light, at his proposed roommates, 2 other cars and some bicycles. Even the barracks back at Upham were more of a human habitation, and the inhabitants weren't altogether human. Never mind. He picked up a couple of duffel bags and started moving, relatives scattered. Uncle Nathan, Aunt Constance, and his sister Lily followed. "Where are you going?" Nathan asked. "I'm going to camp in the backyard tonight." "Where?" "Where beasts live, in the woods, at the edge at least." "Did you bring a tent?" "Don't need one." The backyard was lit well enough now by house lights on snow. Charliehorse headed for the family plot and dropped his luggage next to the graves at the edge of the forest. "There?" Lily asked, incredulous. "There. Doubt it'll please Mark. Just as obvious to guests as the garage, and maybe more eccentric, but I can't say I care." Constance snorted. She and the others followed him back to the garage. The rest of the family had retreated indoors, though he could see silhouettes moving against windows and hear excited voices. "But the cold," Nathan started. "I think that concrete floor would actually be colder than the snow, and I know I can camp in snow. I've done it." And the view was better. "But the wind," Constance objected in turn. "There's not much. The trees will shield a lot. And I have a blanket, a horse blanket, a good one, and my winter coats come in." "Winter coat?" Lily asked. He looked down at her and ruffled the fur behind his foreleg in demonstration. "Winter coat. Lots of fun come shedding season, I'm told." Lily stared. He suspected she was experiencing all over the shock of realizing that brother was horse and horse was brother. "Sorry, sweets." "And I have the square cube law going for me." "Square cube?" "I hold heat well because of being so big." Constance cleared her throat. "You said this was for tonight. And after?" They were back at the garage. He picked up the second load of luggage. "What would you suggest?" he asked her, then turned to Nathan to share the question with him. Well, Constance gathered her housecoat around her and looked uncomfortable, but it wasn't the cold. "I hate to take a page from Mark's book, and I don't mean to order you out, but might it be best if you called Upham and had them pick you up tomorrow, or the day after?" Charliehorse glowered at her. This had happened, though not often, when he was a lumpish teenager, and came with teenager territory, she knew. She had 4 of her own. It was different coming from this. Old Charles, human Charles, boy Charles, had had a lot of anxiety in his rare glowers. Not this Charles. "They're coming to pick me up after the new year," he told her. "A change of plan would require an emergency. I would not like to think we have an emergency." Constance looked away. "No, certainly not." And she appeared about as happy as most people suddenly cumbered with a large and unwanted piece of livestock. "We just aren't ready, Charles," Nathan apologized. "A few minutes ago we were all asleep. We had no notion you were coming, thanks to Mark. We've had no time to think. What did you expect in the way of accommodation?" he asked, looking for guidance. Charliehorse dropped the second set of luggage next to the first and contemplated his aunt and uncle. After Aunt Lou had died, they had taken him in a loose-coupled way. After all, he'd been a college student. How much fostering was he supposed to need? Informally, he had belonged to the Arlingways. Aunt Lou had been an Arlingway, and his room was in the Arlingway house. But unofficially, unspoken, Constance and Nathan, his father's brother, had become the adults in charge of Charles, insofar as he had needed any, since clearly neither his parents nor Mark and Eleanor were going to do it. Constance and Nathan had been astonished and upset when he announced that he had signed up for the dedicated cavalry, but aside from repeated "Are you sure?" questions, they had not opposed him. They had taken him to Upham to be transformed. They had said goodbye there. Their attitude had, of course, been sunshine and roses compared to Mark and Eleanor's, who had denounced him as unnatural, perverse, grotesque in spirit, and all too ready to become grotesque in body, a disgusting disgrace to the family. And his mother had had the vapors, and his father had been silent. Constance and Nathan had not opposed him, and so in that weak sense had been for him, but they had not said or suggested that this surprise reappearance was a happy surprise. He had left home, as young people do, but in a shocking and upsetting way. They had seen him through it. Now they did not know what to do with him. So what had he expected? Fair question. He started unpacking and sighed. He saw they were surprised at the sound. His sighs were now longer and windier than human. I expected to stay in the garage, really, though I hadn't realized how grim it was. Okay, he'd been fair, back to being nettled. Although, I will say, I was hoping someone would offer to let me stay in the house. More surprise. How? Nathan asked. I mean, you can't even fit in there. Oh, yes, I can. I took classes. I'd wipe my hooves nicely before entering, be slow and careful, not switch my tail. Lily winced slightly. And take extra care not to rear. It'd be like having a piano moved into the room, but it could be done. I've done it. I was hoping for the study. I could shove the furniture over to the bookcases and put a mat on the floor. But I have just put the mat on the snow instead, and that will be fine. He tried to speak the last bit lightly, but it came out tight. He opened another bag and took out his horse blanket. He flung it over his back and started working on the buckles. Will that be enough? Asked Constance, unbelieving. Yes, he answered shortly. He did a few buckles, then thawed slightly. The blanket, the mat, my fur, my size, my jacket, even the snow, as I said, they're all insulation. I'll be fine. Go back to bed. I'll be here in the morning for good or ill. We'll figure out something then. He settled onto the mat, pulled the bag over, and took out scarf and gloves. He put them on, then made gentle shooing motions and repeated, I'll be fine. Lily hugged him. Nathan shook his hand, and Constance kissed his cheek. He was surprised and pleased. He had not been at all sure they would want to touch him. Then they wished him good night and retreated. While they were still in sight, Charliehorse realized he was hungry. He also realized they were no more prepared to feed him than they had been to house him. He shrugged the issue away. He looked to the right. There, against the edge of the woods, lay the family grave plot, no more than 4 yards on a side. The Darnleys and Arlingways had had this double household just 3 generations. The burial ground held only 3 of Charliehorse's grandparents, a stillborn infant of Constance's, and Aunt Lou. Little headstones, no bigger than loaves of bread, were hidden under the snow. No matter. Charliehorse knew Lou's epitaph by heart. Lucille Mildred Arlingway, 1927 to 2016, Lux Perpetua Luciadae Domine. Requiem aeternam done, Domine, he recited, memory spurred, et lux perpetua Luciadae, requiescat in pace. Amen. He let himself miss her for a few seconds, then said, Well, Aunt Lou, if you approve of the change, you're the only one. He addressed the remark to the sky, not the grave. This place was merely appropriate for meeting. If her soul had lingered here, which would have been horrible, he would have seen. Like most Grand Normans, he was ghost-sensitive. After her death, he had kept watch with a guilty hope of seeing her, but only felt the hole she left in the world slowly closing. Everyone else's reactions are unchanged. Maybe Mark is right, though I hate to say it, and the email silence should have made me realize I was unwelcome. I certainly worried I was. I just hoped. Maybe I should have tried phone or text or hard copy mail when I got the silent treatment by email. But I didn't know to try, of course, and it's hard to challenge the silent treatment. You start out feeling it's no use. And they didn't try either. Nobody tried. He gave another windy, horsey sigh. What a family, so good at avoiding unpleasant topics and letting sleeping dogs lie. I've sometimes wondered if it was an adaptation to having so many people in just these two houses. Big houses, but still just two. His phone chimed. It had done so 4 times on the trip out here, always for the little holiday-related news bulletins from the cavalry base at Upham, like sleigh practice 1400 tomorrow, track, or chapel decorating tonight. He had checked each time in case it had been from home. He ignored it now. Well, I hope you approve, or at least understand. He had poured out his reasons to her more than once, though necessarily post-mortem, since that was when the idea and the resolve for transformation came to him. She could or would make no comment. And we'll follow Charliehorse and his attempted visit home for Christmas next time.